Hello and welcome to the CX Files for March 27th, 2025. My name's Mark Hillary and I'm in Sao Paulo, Brazil, although I'm actually halfway between Sao Paulo and Rio at the moment because it's my daughter's birthday and I'm at the beach.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, we wish Olivia a very happy birthday and a very, very pleasant visit to the beautiful beaches that you find in Brazil at this time of the year.
Oh yeah, it's very nice, especially as you're coming out of winter and not coming out of summer and heading towards winter. It actually becomes very warm and dry, so it's the best time.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's fantastic, Mark. And, as we think a little bit about what's going on in the world right now, I think we're very lucky this week to have somebody who I believe brings a lot of gravitas to our podcast, somebody who you and I have both known for years and have a tremendous amount of respect for. That's Dave Rumble. Now, Dave is probably, I would say, one of the most well-known individuals in the BPO and the CX community. No matter what the topic, he always has readily formed substantial opinions that are based on concrete evidence and his own experience. So what are we chatting with Dave about today?
Yeah, well, this came out of the episode a few weeks ago that you did with Joel Walker. So, Joel and Dave are both co-founders of TKG, and I wrote something on LinkedIn about a month ago that was about some Forrester Research information on how B2B buyers are changing behavior, and they're really leaning into Gen AI to ask for information on suppliers. So they're even asking for supplier comparisons using just general tools like ChatGPT. And I thought this was interesting. And Forrester, in particular, believes that 9 out of 10 B2B buyers are now doing this as the first step in finding a supplier. So I thought that was particularly interesting. And I commented on this and said that this could be a sort of a low budget version of, what Joel was talking about on the podcast, because Joel was talking about TKG and how they put together this database of information on suppliers, but even down to very detailed data points. How many people work there, what are their specialities, what kind of equipment have they got, what specialization do they have. So you can go into the TKG database and really ask detailed questions. And I posted my article, and Dave actually commented and said to me, hey, you realize that we've got Gen AI built into this system as well. And this is actually a partnership between Maistro and TKG. And they've created something called Maistro GPT, which is essentially using the data that they've put together over years on pretty much every supplier that's out there. But you can have conversations with the AI system about this. So if you want to just ask questions of any of their data, you can do it in a conversational style. So I just said straight away to Dave, well, let's have a conversation about this. Let's find out, because if I can actually now just say, who has the most specialists in this particular area in the EMEA region, and I can get reliable data back immediately without needing to be a specialist in data analysis or searches, then that sounds really special.
It does. And I think that it's wise that you bring this into the realm of discussion, Mark, because the fact of the matter is how B2B is being done in terms of sourcing suppliers, how organizations need to market from a B2B angle is going to change substantially. It already has begun. And hearing what somebody like Dave, who's been really, I think, at the forefront of a lot of these discussions has to say will really make a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's one thing to ask ChatGPT a question about different BPO suppliers, but I think it's a completely different thing to go into a database that someone like a combination of Maestro data with TKG. I mean, those guys have been putting this together for years, and then to actually be able to slap an AI engine on top, allowing you just to query the data easily. I mean, that really sounds fantastic to me. I mean, I would contrast this. I often say to people, you can't buy a new TV from Samsung and then go to ChatGPT and ask a question and say, how do I set up the internet? How do I set up the Wi-Fi on my new TV? Because chat GPT may be able to tell you about the history of the River Thames in London, or the history of the Roman Empire, because it's been trained on all of this information across the internet. But when you take a very specific consumer product that's got a user manual that almost certainly hasn't been fed into that AI system, then it's going to be completely useless when you're asking a question about how to set up that TV. So that's why, brands, I mean, Samsung is just one example, but brands like this that are exploring Gen AI are looking at small language models. So where the language model has all the information about the product itself, the FAQs, they know what customers often ask. And so that's how they're sort of building AI usefulness around that. And I think that, this is exactly the same that we're seeing here with the kind of supplier directory, that you can ask ChatGPT a question about concentrics or teleperformance, but it will only be relying on publicly available data that's been published in online journals and blogs and information that is generally out there. I don't think that you can compare the quality of that information with what Dave is talking about here.
Oh, I agree. Well, let's go to the interview with Dave, find out a little bit more his insights in your discussion with him.
Right, Dave, it's great to get you on the pod. Now, this came about because Joel Walker was on the pod recently, and he was talking about TKG and your supplier database, and the information you've got on BPOs globally. And there was a lot of granular detail. It sounded very impressive. How long did it take you guys to put that together, and how much effort do you need to put in to sort of keep it up to date?
Yeah, so I think, look, we've got two businesses, so it's just worth probably just qualifying that to start with. So Maistro as a platform has been around, I think it was formed in 2007. So it's got, kind of 20 years of, being a SaaS business, pure SaaS business, super high volume. There's about 35,000, maybe even 40,000 suppliers on the Maistro platform. So tremendous amount of data. And obviously that data goes back and we can see different purchase cycles. Now, we merged TKG with Maistro in 2022. And the two organizations focus on slightly different parts of the market. So Maistro was in what we call the pre-award category. So for those, kind of just trying to simplify that. So this is the buy element of the journey. From a procurement and sourcing perspective. So it's all of the traditional things like expressions of interest, PQQ, RFI, RFP, the purchase event, the evaluation, and then into BAFO. So the mechanics of that process is essentially what Maistro were doing. TKG was formed to do the post-award world and the post-award work, which is when you get into the operation of a contract. And what we were seeing, and kind of the rationale behind TKG, with that a lot of customers were buying something, thinking that they were buying something really well, and then finding 12, 18 months later that they hadn't bought as well as they thought. And somebody from procurement is going, hang on a second, I thought it was only going to cost 20 million, and it now looks like it's costing 60. What's gone on? So yeah, so the two businesses coming together gives us the opportunity to really get into the buy, build, operate. So but for the Maistro platform, the essence and the security of the data is all in that pre-award, and the substance of the intelligence and the knowledge bases in that pre-award world. So the data that exists in there is largely driven by kind of nearly 20 years of Maistro and then 5 years of TKG. So a lot of sourcing events and clearly a lot of suppliers that have gone through a vetting process.
Yeah. And Joel, I mean, he got in touch with me recently because I wrote an article looking at some Forrester Research data. They actually published something recently, and they were talking about the B2B buyer journey, and they were saying how 9 out of 10 buyers are now turning to Gen AI for advice. And I tested it out myself, and I just explored, asking about different suppliers, and comparing different suppliers, and you can get some good information, even just from publicly available Chat GPT. I mean, Joel saw that article that I wrote, and he said, I need to talk to you about Maistro GPT. So you guys have created a LLM out of all of this data you've collected over the past 2 decades. So could you give us an outline of that system then?
Yeah, well, I think some of the advances in the technology and in effectively what AI is delivering. So, if I go back, a number of years, the process of retrieval of data, search engines that we're all familiar with, essentially is prompt driven. So you ask a question and you get a response, and the narrowness or the breadth of that response is driven by the data that sits behind. With the development and of evolution, excuse me, of AI and the way that AI is now structured. So we're now able to use combinations of data retrieval to go and secure information and evidence so that you can make things very much more specific. So, a chat GPT, which has got huge powers of computation, is able to look across the whole world and all of the universe of data and surface back an answer that it thinks is right. But what we can do when we've got these little LLMs, which is what we've got with the Maestro platform, is we can make it much more factually accurate, much more domain specific. And so the effort actually goes into the process of building what we call knowledge graphs, which go into, well, these are relevant to the industry and these are relevant to the buyer. So I can use a technique called RAG to go and get the data and the information, apply a knowledge graph and say, well, that's relevant in this industry and at this point in time with this supplier, with this query and this requirement. And it'll bring back a much more customized view of a response. So so the advancement in the way that the data is interrogated has been the critical thing that underpins GPT. So this is an evolution, and look, I mean, it's developing at such a pace that it's quite difficult. So we're using RAG, knowledge graphs, and then this agentic AI, or agent-driven AI, which is in its really early stages. But some of these things are now, kind of being made possible by having large quantities of data. So I think it's, for us, we're only in the buy journey because that you don't get hallucination. You can remove bias. Post award, it's quite difficult. We're grappling with it, but getting under the skin of removing bias is quite difficult. But at the award stage, if I'm a client and I'm looking for a CX partner that's got capability in this industry sector with this experience and these case studies and operating with these clients, and I need this, financial performance, then these are the type of things that we can build into Maestro GPT relatively straightforwardly.
Yeah. So, and I mean, previously with this kind of data analysis, you would have needed some kind of understanding of the underlying data.
Yeah.
If you're using something like SQL to query the database, then, but what you're saying now is you can almost have a natural language conversation and say, I'm looking at a supplier. I prefer them to be in sub-Saharan Africa, but they've got to have retail experience. Can you recommend the top 3 in that region? So it will be able to you'll be able to just sort of query it in that way.
Yeah, and the level of sophistication that goes beyond that. So clearly, in particularly the stuff that we've done with managed service and assisted service in TKG, where we're getting into a sourcing process which will probably involve some form of transformation. So the supplier is putting forward lots of case studies, and those case studies are being used to qualify the purchase decision and go into an evaluation. So, an RFP submission, most organizations will just read an RFP and they'll do the evaluation and score off the evaluation. And then there's always a litany of additional data that gets submitted, and these will be case studies. And in those case studies, there'll be pieces of evidence and information that are not publicly available because these are held, clearly quite often in NDA'd or kind of confidential environments. But what it does do is it gives us the ability to read some of those amendments to say, okay, I want something transformative. I want somebody that's got messaging experience. I want somebody that's done something in WhatsApp, in retail, in um, oh, I don't know, two-man delivery. So it's a retail with, delivering furniture. So what we can do is we can use those knowledge graphs to go into the data and pull that information back and say, look, here's a reliable data point that says we've got this capability. And exactly as you said, and they operate from Cape Town or they operate equally from Cairo. And what we can do is we can pull these things together and say, okay, here's a much better fit. So um, it allows a lot more, a lot less effort on the part of the supplier, which was always the critical thing for us. Was look, if you just want to put your artifacts there, we can extract those and extract the information from those. Put your bid library in, and we can use your bid library. So it just gives a bit more certainty in. And we call it intelligent decisioning, but it's just a bit more certainty in the qualification of the information and data.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, and it's interesting because you said there about like reducing the volume of data and like focusing on specific subjects, like small
yeah,
language models rather than large language models.
yeah,
And I think
yeah,
that I mean, often I've kind of described this to people by saying, ChatGPT, for example, is trained on pretty much everything. You've got the whole of
yeah,
Wikipedia in there
yeah,
and vast amounts of publicly available data. So you can ask it about the history of
yeah,
Rome or the history of the River Thames
yeah,
or pretty much anything it's going to know
yeah,
about. But if you've just bought a smart TV from Samsung and you can't set up the Wi-Fi, then
yeah.
almost certainly ChatGPT isn't going to be able to tell you how to do that setup, because
No,
that kind of very specific product
yeah,
information isn't going to be in there. So it's great for pub quizzes, but it's not very good at customer
yeah,
service,
yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah,
so it's almost like what you're saying here about taking those case studies, the RFPs, the bids, and all the background information you've got on the suppliers. So if you're then only training the engine on that data, it's not going to give you any of those pub quiz answers, but it can answer anything about a BPO supplier. Then, yeah,
yeah. And I think that's there's a lot of talk about hallucinations and these things that you'll get, which is where, as you say, ChatGPT, huge computation, huge data sets. Um, but obviously, the things that go into the data labeling and the data annotation that will give you those much more specific and factually accurate answers are more difficult for some of these things that, I mean, they got just immense power, immense computation power. Um, but they're not able to, exactly as you just said with that Samsung example, to get into the specifics. So this is the great thing. I mean, it's one of those ones from a legacy perspective, and probably not envisaged when they put the platform together and founded the business in 2007. Is the data labeling and the vetting was done automatically in the Maestro platform. So some of those things that OpenAI have had to do in data annotation and data tagging to provide a greater degree of accuracy and to remove bias, the engineering of the Maestro platform has removed some of those things for us. So you're exactly right. So you can make it much more domain specific. You can target very specific elements of a supplier's capability, because those are the things that we're vetting. You can draw in, using RAG, we can draw in other pieces of technology that will help with the formation or writing of an RFP based on what we're seeing, in customer written RFPs, as well as things that are generic RFPs. And everybody's using ChatGPT nowadays to write, you know, posts on LinkedIn, and it's all great for these kind of things. But when you've got something that's nuanced around a contract or something that goes into the relationship, you need much more specificity. So that's the power that we can add. It's just that that extra bit of intelligence into the process. So I never know whether is it an LLM or is it an SLM, or is it we're into this kind of, is it just a private cloud? Well, it's just a reliable data set that gives us a better ability to help people buy better.
yeah,
It doesn't at the moment give us the ability to help people run the operation better, because this is I mean, this is very nuanced, clearly. And we are doing some clever stuff there, particularly around the use of technology that is less emotive and carries, you don't do many MBRs between your technology provider and your client. You will do if you're running a BPO or a GBS or a CXO service. So, technology for us and the purchasing of technology is a big source of development. But yeah, it's amazing what can be achieved if you've just got
Yeah.
the data structured in the right way. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I
Yeah.
suppose a good example then is like going back to that what Forrester Research was saying about
Yeah.
the buyer community. I mean, if I was thinking that I want a supplier for CX services, and I'm really keen to go to El Salvador, for example,
Yeah.
I could go to OpenAI or Google right now and ask, who's the most experienced or best CX supplier
Yeah.
available in El Salvador, and I'm sure it would come up with some recommendations. But that would all be based on publicly available, mostly like media articles and stuff. Then
Yeah. Yeah.
that has been trained on. Whereas if I ask the same question of Maestro GPT, then you'd have a lot of actual kind of case study data and like much more
Yeah.
detailed information. Yeah.
Exactly that point. It's about the relevance to the inquiry, and exactly as you say, if you're going to go on to, one of the bigger tools, whether it's Anthropic or Perplexity or Grok or any of these, they'll generally draw the information in, and it'll say, yeah, they've got something in El Salvador. What it won't tell you is how many people are working in El Salvador at that time, and what projects are they working on, what experience have the management got, what case studies and what reference points. Clearly, it won't give you anything about the competitive position, which clearly a key part of procurement when people are writing a business case. Is this price stable? Because we've got a lot of stuff going on in the world now with the exchange controls and currency volatility. So people are looking for more certainty. There's definitely a lower risk appetite now with sourcing, so that's definitely part of that organizational inertia is there's a fear of making the wrong decision. So I don't want to speak for the outsourcers, but in that industry, but there's this kind of circularity to it, which it's I'm going to outsource, but do I trust you? And we get into this whole kind of trust cycle. So how do I, it's that kind of how do I prove it? So these are some of the things that we're trying today is to try to do with GPT is to say, well, look, we'll give you the basis that you can ask the right questions of the supplier with the knowledge that that they're doing some of those things. So it's rather than a tell me, it's a show me. And that gives a much more successful outcome when you've bought that I'm talking to the person that was able to articulate what goes on in El Salvador in retail for that particular client, and I'm transposing that for you.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, ultimately, anything that can help organizations buy better is a good thing.
Mm.
Um, because I don't want to be again critical of clients, but there's a lot of the market are not very good at buying.
Yeah.
Um, and so, just giving them a bit more capacity and a bit more intelligence around the decision is the right thing.
I mean, in your view, then, I mean, have you seen a lot of B2B buyers leaning into this kind of Gen AI then as a way of sort of sifting through all the information that's out there? Because it always used to be, oh, let's buy with this guy because it's he's in the top right of the Gartner 2x2 chart,
Yeah.
or Forrester Research recommends this, or Everest. So are we seeing now that people are saying no? Gemini or Grok or whatever, any of these tools has really
Yeah.
rated this supplier, and is that sort of changing the whole way that buyers behave?
I think this is one of those ones that's a really, really, really interesting debate because there's an argument that what it'll make buyers more lazy. So, on one side, it's a bit like, we have cars, so we now need to go to a gym and exercise because we're not walking. So is this going to dumb down? So, again, I don't want to be, kind of too controversial, but there are people who are very lazy and will take superficially the first answer that they get from an AI, whether it's a chat GPT. So so that kind of first pass qualification introduces bias, and people are experimenting, and they're not really pushing the capacity or capability of these tools. So they're happy to take a superficial answer and say, well, I found this out in we keep coming back to ChatGPT, but I found this in this OpenAI platform. So so the basis really is to draw people into we need to make you more curious, because that curiosity, you're building a relationship here potentially with somebody that's a much longer term relationship. And so, a bit like you have with with the dating apps now, and the whole emergence of how people are building their relationships is, okay, we want you to sift and sort, but make sure that you're asking the right questions when you're building your profile for the type of organization that you want to source with, rather than, I'm looking for this, I look like this, and therefore I need to buy something that looks. And I think that's, when we get into the science of it, is just trying to people bring a bit more humanity into the cycle of purchase, and just take out, right, this is a car, it will get you from A to B, right? But along the way, actually, it's the route that you take. So some people just want to go on the quickest route. Some people say, oh, I take the scenic route. That's what we're trying to bring to this, is to just bring a bit more, elevate the process. Yeah, so there's a bit more in it. Because ultimately, God, sorry.
No, I was just going to say then, do you think that all the information that many of the suppliers are publishing is going to become more useful then, because it's feeding into these engines and training them and giving them more information on case studies and abilities and views? It's training the engines in what these suppliers can do. Whereas, I mean, previously they would post a white paper and 10 people around the world might read it.
And I think that, I mean, this is a super powerful point for suppliers, that disconnected stories and individuals within organizations doing things. But you're absolutely right, having a position on something. So just because you posted a white paper and only 3 or 4 people are reading it, clearly we can send out the crawler, we can go and fetch that information, and that information will be drawn into the platform and is accessible. So I think the one thing from a supplier perspective is the constant debate is who's educating who. So there's from a consulting perspective, if you take the Gartners and the Forresters of the world and the BCGs and the McKinseys, who are producing a lot of strategic content and thought leadership, okay, clients will respond to that. If you're reading Harvard Business Review and they're responding to these things. I think there's a you're absolutely right. There's a greater degree of effort now that the suppliers need to do to educate not just themselves, but also the buyers about what their position is on certain things. But it doesn't necessarily have to be, I need a huge communications function. Allow people to, to the ability to contribute in El Salvador, the site manager or whatever, to do this stuff, because it's adding a richer profile to your business. It's that I think then brings. I'll come back to that point about bringing humanity into the process, because it's a relationship, and these are the things that give rise to the right sorts of questions about what people's business interests is and what's happening in the location in El Salvador. What are you doing to impact the community? Because that's important to us as an organization. So, it's just adding that extra color and flavor, which I think is super important.
Yeah. In fact, just on that point, I mean, I wasn't really planning to ask about that sort of stuff, but do you think that becomes the culture of the supplier then becomes more important? Because I suppose having this information-rich environment and being able to compare and contrast the suppliers at a data level, it's now becoming much more effective and much easier to do that. So if you end up with they're in the same ballpark in terms of
Yeah.
price. It seems like they've got the same capabilities. Do things like culture and how they engage with the community, does that actually then become much more of a differentiator?
Definitely. So I think what you get with a large proportion of the evaluations, and we see this, obviously, we see this through the platform, that the functional, the case studies, the data requirements, the commercials, the capacity, the attitude of the business, all of those things can be captured quite easily and quite clinically. And the like, trust, believe elements, which go to exactly your point, which is, well, how do I test culture? How do I see that where, I'm a desktop buyer, I'm the procurement consultant, I'm not necessarily going to travel to El Salvador, but I need to make a decision about whether this is the right organization. So, those pieces of evolution for us in the platform is to say, you're absolutely right. Can we look in beyond those elements to say, okay, what language is being used? So when somebody, a site manager or a team manager or a trainer on these sites is posting material, how are they describing the people that work for the organization? What are those images showing us that are going into the organization? So you can look at congruence, and you can look at that really quite quickly to say, well, these are the values that I espouse as an organization. Or does that manifest itself in the language because you're posting 100 times a day, or if you're a very large organization in this sector, probably 2,000-3,000 times a day with with the people in your employee base? Do these two things align? Quite a lot of people, we can take in data like Glassdoor, we can take in data review, you can do that, we can automatically suck those two things in.
Mm.
But actually, you're right. What does the CEO post? What do they put in their financial statements? What does the team manager say? What does the new recruit say? Because we can see
Mm.
those.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so that's where I'd like to take it, is actually, all of the data that is there, the cold factual elements. But when you go on your first date, does that stand up?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then, obviously we see on all the dating apps, well, so many people get married and this kind of stuff. Well, okay, they got married, but did they survive? Did that, do you have a lower divorce rate? So these sorts of things, you start to go, well, actually, that's the humanity side. And I think that's the bit that most procurement people miss. And this is
Mm.
a kind of a big thing, which is actually we have to live with this relationship. And these are living, breathing organizations, probably thousands of miles away, and we're going to get bumps in the road, and it's how we respond to those bumps in the road that's the important thing. So I think that we have to leave an element of humanity in, and then if we can
Yeah.
just do the qualification to give the questions, I think that's the biggest gain. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, I mean, just to wrap up, do you have anything going on this year? Any big plans or announcements? What's coming up for TKG and Maestro?
So, well, I think from a business perspective, the GPT we've got in pilot through TKG. I think um, the evolution of the GPT platform. So we're working well with, I mean, the Digicode guys. I should have mentioned them. They've been amazing. They've helped us. We moved from an in-house software team to an outsourced software team, and the team at Digicode have been fantastic. So a further evolution in GPT. I think the big one for this year is to introduce agentic support, so that the platform learns itself. So if there's a piece of data missing, then the machine will go out and go and secure that data. So Spencer and I are out in Bratislava with the team in next month. So we're looking to see if we can build that. So agentic capability. When we've got that, then we'll make Maestro GPT available. So probably Q3, Q4. From a TKG perspective is TKG IQ. So this is all of the information and all the data that resides and sits in, obviously in the Maestro platform, but is very specific to GBS. And where TKG IQ will play is in technology and the procurement and sourcing of technology, because people buy technology very badly. So those are the two big things for us: is Maestro GPT access for the general market, and then TKG IQ, but very focused on the purchase of technology. Yeah.
Right, Dave, that's great. Thanks very much.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Thanks for listening to the CX Files podcast. We really appreciate your feedback and suggestions. You can reach myself, Mark Hillary, or Peter Ryan via LinkedIn. Please also leave a rating or review on your favourite podcast provider, as that helps more people to find us. As always, we'd like to thank Chris Haig at Traction Media for the CX Files graphics. See you next week. Hello and welcome to the CX Files for March 27th, 2020. I'm fucking up all the dates.
That's all right. You're allowed.
Every time.